Okay. We're going to call to order the Wednesday, July 18th regular Board of Education meeting. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Right over there. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Capabianca? Here. Mr. Cavanero?
Here.
Mrs. O'Malley? Mr. Kisco?
Here.
Mr. Marola?
Here.
Mr. Nargi?
Here.
Mr. Rivero? Mr. Tebow?
Here.
Mr. Traub?
Here.
Mrs. Batcho? Here. Mrs. DeMonico?
Here.
Mr. Jocelyn?
Here.
Mrs. Flacco? Here. Mayor Bingham?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend the agenda.
Okay.
Under informational sharing sessions, I'd like to add in as number 6, review of the board retreat that we had last night. And then under discussion and action items, I'd like to add in as number 4, a initial request to send out an RFP for IT services for the district.
I'd like to also add one more under discussion and action items. I'd like to add 5. At this point, we'll call it newspaper articles. We'll get more specific when we get to it. We have a second for that amendment, second by Fiona. Any discussion about it? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None. Okay. School community session. Do we have our sign-up sheet out anywhere?
It is out and there are notes.
It's on that table.
Okay. The board invites members of the community to speak on topics to be addressed in the agenda or on other topics of interest. Individuals wishing to make comments are requested to fill out the speaker's sign-up sheet, including name and address, which must be stated at the beginning of your comment. The board will not allow comments regarding specific staff members or personal grievances. Courtesy is expected in this limited public forum. Participating time will be limited to 3 minutes per person, 10 minutes overall, to guarantee an efficient operation of the entire meeting. Okay, seeing as we have none. Approval for the amended agenda.
Motion to.
Motion by Fiona, second by Daniel. All those in favor? Okay. Moving right along. Approval of minutes. Board of Education meeting, June 20th, 2012. Motion by Mrs. Fuller, second by Ben. Any discussion? Clarifications, questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Fiona Capabianco is an abstention to that. Okay, informational sharing. Smarter balance assessment.
Okay, earlier in the year, we talked about how the schools, all schools in Connecticut will be going to the Smarter Balance Assessment as, and away from the current Connecticut Mastery Test that we all know and love. So Susan has a presentation here tonight to give you some example of what the assessment is going to look like, that it's multi-stepped, multi-resources students will be required to use. It will also be designed so that, depending on how the child responds to the first question, where they go from there. But I'll turn it over to Susan.
Okay, and there's going to be a test after this, so get ready. As I prepared this presentation quite some time ago because I have been sharing information about the Smarter Balanced Assessments with the faculty as we've been learning more about it over the course of the last year. I also want to bring to your attention this Sunday's Hartford Current that led with a front page story, Mastery Tests on the Way Out. New ones adjust to students. So there is an extensive article that also includes some test items in Sunday's Hartford Current in case you want to verify what I'm saying is correct or get some additional information about it. But what's really interesting about it is it really is a complete change in the paradigm of student assessment. It's a very, very different kind of test. Just to give you some statistics, the new Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium includes 29 states across the country. There are other states that are involved in a similar assessment system called the PARCC assessment, P-A-R-C-C. Connecticut chose to join this one because of some differences in the assessment design and also its affiliation with some really significant major educational experts that they felt gave it more credibility. 15 million students will be tested. They will be developing, at least initially, a test bank of 40,000 test items. Unlike the current CMT and CAPT, which is given primarily over a 2-week window of time, 1 or 2 tests every day that range from 45 minutes to 70 minutes in length. This test will actually have a 12-week window for testing. And we'll talk about why that's possible as we go through the presentation. It is not strictly a timed test. And because of that, there's likely to be some variation in the amount of time that students are actually participating in the Smarter Balanced items. And because it's a computer-based test, there's a very, very fast turnaround time on the results. So it's not like we are today, where the test is given in March, and all of them are shipped back and actually shipped down to North Carolina to be scored, and then all of the information has to be aggregated and reported, and the districts do not have access to that information generally until the beginning of August. And in fact, the state testing results embargo will be lifted on Friday, and information about district performance will be available to the public after Friday, July 20th. So with this test, why is technology needed? Because the questions are in a computer adaptive format, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And some of them are actually interactive in nature. So students will get some type of stimulus or some type of activity where they'll need to actually utilize some type of technology tool. They might meet in groups and talk about things, and then they have to go onto a device, whether it's a desktop or a laptop or a tablet or some other kind of technology interface to enter their answers in. Another thing that's unique about the Smarter Balance is that it includes something that we have never seen before in a widespread standardized testing platform, and that's a performance task. A performance task is when you give students a problem and then they have to utilize knowledge that they've learned in their classes in order to be able to solve the problem. So they're actually applying knowledge and skills and dispositions that they have to an actual situation. The performance tasks have a stimulus. Students will watch a little video clip. They may look at a collage of photos like Pinterest or something like that. They may have access to 2D or 3D modeling where they watch, an item be constructed, like a bridge being built or something like that. And they also may have access to databases. So it's a very rich kind of experience. The technology is also needed because students will be utilizing data analysis software. They may utilize simulations where they act in almost like a virtual environment. They may have access, they may need spreadsheets, equation editor tools, chat rooms. All of these are features that we normally would not utilize in testing but are part of this testing platform. And then they need to be able to generate a product or a performance that can be submitted and then scored using artificial intelligence like they use for the writing scoring on the SATs and GREs and GMATs and other large-scale standardized testing, which is really mostly now at the graduate level. Okay, so computer adaptive testing. Something that we haven't ever dealt with before. Based on the student's response, the computer program will actually adjust the difficulty of questions throughout the assessment. So, for example, if a student answers a question correctly, the next question they get will be a little bit harder. But if they answer it incorrectly, they'll get a question of similar or easier difficulty on the same topic to allow the program to assess what do they really know. So by adapting this, the assessment really kind of gets down to an individually tailored set of questions, and it can identify those things that the students can do and where they're going to hit the wall. So when I've explained this to staff, we've used this weightlifting analogy. Okay, the fixed test that we currently have is kind of like lifting a 50-pound dumbbell. Okay, if you can do it, great. If you can't, we don't know if you could have lifted 45 pounds or 40 pounds or 35 pounds. We just know you can't lift 50 pounds. And if you can lift it, we don't know if you could lift 60 or more than that. So what this does is it kind of gives these increments so you can get precisely the right amount of information to tell you what the student can handle. Okay, so there are actually two parts to the test. In that 40,000 item test bank, teachers can elect to have students practice with the Smarter Balance test to get information about how the students are doing. And they can do that throughout the year, so students are familiar and comfortable with the testing, and so they can get information to know what to help the students to learn and to do better. But then at the end of the school year, during that 12-week period, that's when they do the test that counts, the one that will get reported to our state education agency and to the federal government, depending upon whether NCLB and the Education Reform Act, the ESEA, is renewed. So what happens in the summative test is it tests the content that's identified in the Common Core standards. And it will measure student achievement and growth across time. So right now, we have to do a lot of work if we want to look at a cohort of students. We have to look at their scores one year, and then we move them to the next year. We have to make sure we're looking at the same students, and then if we move it another year. And as we know, in a district like Torrington and other urban districts, where there's a lot of mobility and a lot of other factors at play, you have to do a lot of work to make sure that you have a very closely matched cohort. In this one, because it's being used across the state, that'll help us keep track of student performance a little bit better. The summative test can be given once or twice during the school year, and it includes a lot of different kinds of questions. And this is the education speak part here. Selected response, where you have choices, you have to pick among some choices. Constructed response, which are like, not really fill in the blank, but like short answer kind of questions. Extended constructive response, which are maybe a couple sentences to answer. Technology enhanced ones, where the students will have to do something, perform in some way, and then the performance tasks. So all of the information that's in the English, language arts, and mathematics Common Core standards are going to be clustered into kind of testable items based on the grade level. And a student will start with an entry-level item that's roughly the grade level. The one I'm going to give you is a 6th grade item, so that you can see this is what 6th graders ought to be able to handle. If they get it right, they get a little harder one. If they get it wrong, they get kind of a similar one. Like I said, it adapts so that you can get accurate information. The items will get easier or harder, and we were told by Tony Alpert, who is one of the developers in the Smarter Balance, that every student is going to walk away saying that this is a hard test, because they're not going to you won't have an opportunity to get them all right. If you keep getting answers correct and you keep doing well, you'll keep getting harder questions. And students will persist with the testing until they get half the items wrong. But it's also on the other end, it helps to respond to those students who get the first 5 wrong and say, oh, I just don't know anything, I just give up. It encourages them to keep going and to keep demonstrating their knowledge so that you get that precise picture of what they can do.
So with them within the test, they can get parts of it correct, so that we can measure their understanding, say, of a specific content area, or the strategies they're using. Test more than just this one right answer, that's it.
That's right, and particularly with the performance assessments that we're going to look at in a minute, it's not about necessarily getting a single right answer, but there may be lots of correct answers, or there may be lots of correct thinking that goes into the student demonstrating what they know and what they're able to do. So during this year, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium has been developing the test specifications. They've been working on items, and they've developed a technology readiness tool. Connecticut is a governing member of the consortium, so we have actually had people from our State Department of Education who are participating in this and who are writing items. And recently, and Cheryl, you might remember this, we got a solicitation from the state asking teachers who were interested, who were certified in these areas, whether they would like to participate in it as well. So they're trying to be as inclusive as possible.
Let's all have ownership for it.
Because the state of Connecticut was granted an NCLB waiver, what that means is in March of 2013, so next year, at the end of this academic school year, that will be the last time that the current CMT and CAP test will be given in the state of Connecticut. So they're going to we'll give it one more time. We'll bring in all the boxes, we'll sort them all out, we'll hand them all out, and have our meetings, and have everybody tested, and pack them all up and ship them off. But it's the last time. And then beginning in the following year, we will be piloting versions of the Smarter Balanced Assessments to try out our infrastructure, to try out the items, to provide information to the test developers as to whether or not this is a valid assessment. And then in the school year 2014-2015, the spring of 2015, that will be the first year that they'll be given widely across the state where they count. And they're still trying to make some provisions for districts who may not be ready technologically to handle the capacity. But for the most part, as we'll see in a minute, I think they feel that districts will be ready to be on board by 2015. So speaking of technology, the testing does require access to the internet. And they're still making decisions about the variety of devices that can be used. And some of the things that the developers are looking at is the security, protocols, authentications. They talked about the security level of the test being similar to what's used by the banking industry for online banking transactions. So it'll be thoughtful, but we can't always guarantee it's going to be completely foolproof, but that obviously is a significant consideration. There's also going to be minimum hardware and software requirements, but the developers are aware of the fact that many districts have older operating systems and less powerful machines. So they're trying to make something that will work with sort of the lowest common denominator, but they have provided us with some minimum specifications for the devices. They've also, when Tony Alpert spoke with the group a couple months ago, he said, you educators like tablets. So we're doing a lot of test item development that will allow you to use tablet devices in addition to laptops or desktops or other technology interfaces. So I think they're going to be pretty versatile. We have already completed the technology readiness tool that was developed, I think, by Pearson on behalf of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium to provide the consortium with information about what we can handle. And so the readiness tool looked at things like bandwidth and the number of units that are in the district currently, and the training capacity that we have to bring people on board with that. So it was a wide variety of different items on there, and I can probably pull that and share that with anybody who's interested in more detail. Just as, and then include the slide in here, but in another presentation, I have some of the specifications for the devices that they have issued that I'd be happy to share with you. In fact, I can pull that up in another slide later on. So for security issues, unlike the CMT, where it's very probable for all of you to have the same version of the test, usually Form F or Form Q or whatever it might be, and you're peeking over to see what they've got bubbled in over there. Everybody's test is going to be a little bit different, depending upon how they answer their questions. And the test administration window isn't going to be a set period of time for everybody. It'll be usually a range of time. So, as a result of that, the kind of whole group testing that we see for the CMT and for the CAP test is unlikely. It's more likely to have students who are assessed in smaller groups over that 12-week window, so that we'll say, okay, U6 can go to the computer lab or the library media center, the back of the classroom, or here's 6 tablets, and we're going to get you started on this while we do reading workshop with the rest of the class, or while we have a cultural arts activity with the other group, and then rotate students through that experience. What I've been telling teachers is that this test, I'll call it a test because it's a test, this assessment, is going to look a lot more like instruction than it will look like an actual test, because it's so interactive. And the use of technology, I think, really changes it up. That's what I mean by saying that there are allowable teacher and peer interactions. In fact, on many of the items, students will be given a stimulus, like a little video clip or a picture or a spreadsheet, and they'll be allowed to kind of talk it over. And then they'll be given a question or a prompt, and then told to go off and work on that on their own. But you know, back in the old days, we would have called that cheating. But that's certainly a new paradigm in terms of how we think about measuring what students know and what they're able to do. Some of the safety things that they've built into it is that all of the required tools and resources are going to be embedded within their system. So it's not going to be like a free-for-all where they're on the internet and they can go search sites, or they can chat with somebody and say, well, what's the answer? And somebody can chat the answer back to them. There will be firewalls and limits that are built into the design of the test. So just in brief, this is not the CMT given through a computer. That's not at all what it's going to be like. And because the computer adaptive testing will change the difficulty of questions, we're past that day when somebody gets them all right. We believe, as a result of this, that the assessments will yield a more exact measurement of what students know and what they can do. And the scoring that is going to be done is going to be primarily computer scoring, using artificial intelligence programs that are already in use in some big name tests like the GRAs and the GMATs and other standardized tests. I think initially there's going to be a higher percentage of human check, to have humans, teachers, scorers, read these over, but eventually, once they're comfortable that there's a very high correlation, they're going to probably step back on that. So, just to kind of illustrate the point, now it's time for your test. First thing that I'm going to send around to you are some sample items from the current test. And I'm not going to ask you to take them and answer the questions. In fact, on the math one, the answers are already filled in, because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But if you can just take a quick look at the packet, these probably look pretty familiar to you. You probably had tests like this when you were in school. They give you a question, give you some choices, and you pick out the answer, and then you go on to the next one. Okay, so you can see the different kinds of math items that they have. There's some fractions, you have to fill in some diagrams. There's kind of a little problem solving on the next page. There's one where you have to use some logic and put some things in order, and one where you have to fill out a Venn diagram to show membership in different groups. And you know, that's pretty standard fare. The second part of that package is an example of an English language arts item that is currently in use. And this was actually photocopied out of the CMT handbook, which is available on the state website. And what it does is it presents you with a brief story, and then it asks you some questions about the story, and they deal primarily with comprehension and inference and reader text connections. Can you identify something in the story that relates to your life? And so you kind of get a sense for what the current test is like if you don't have students who have recently been through this and brought home CMT practice test booklets to your house. The second packet that's coming around now are sample items for the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And I think almost immediately you're going to see the difference. Are there enough to get around? I have some more here. Paul, do you have one?
No, I need 3 more on this. Wait a minute, Dan's got them all.
Okay. Okay, so these are some of the items that are available on the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium website that we're beginning to investigate and we're beginning to share with teachers so that they get a more accurate picture of the target that they're shooting for now. This isn't about, I'll guess 1 out of 4 and hopefully get one right, or I'll use a test-taking strategy to eliminate 1 or 2 bad answers and guess between 2 of them. This type of assessment, and this is one of their sample performance tasks, that's what the PT stands for, gives the students a realistic problem that they have to solve. They have to sift through the information, they have to take it all in, and then at the end of the task, they're given some questions that they would need to do on their own. For example, based on the results of the survey, which 4 facilities would be used the most, figure the cost of different facilities and the areas that they would occupy, and so on. So in order to be able to complete this, students will have to demonstrate their knowledge of and their proficiency in items that are related to geometry, to arithmetic, to number sense, to probability in some cases, and they have to also be able to sort through and distinguish what's important information and what's extraneous information. So it's much more like what all of us as professionals have to do when we're presented with a situation. We have to bring our knowledge to bear in order to solve a problem. If you flip about halfway through, you'll also see an English language arts task included in here as well. And if you compare the level of questioning on the English language arts item to the sample that I gave you from the CMT, you'll see that once again, the bar has been raised a little bit. For example, on that first page it says steps you're going to be following. In order to plan and compose your essay, you will need to do all of the following in 3 sessions. Read an article and watch 2 videos on the topic of robot pets. Answer 3 questions about the sources. Read another article and watch a video taking notes. Participate in a discussion with a small group of classmates taking notes, and then to plan and write your essay. So once again, we're activating grade level appropriate skills, knowledge, and so on, but in the context of a real problem. So on your own, without embarrassing anybody, you can see how you do. And
Just ask one question.
sure.
This is a grade 6 sample versus a grade 8 sample.
Is that one, are both of them grade 8?
So how
One
is
is 6.
Well, the first, existing one you gave us was grade 6.
Okay. And then both of the smarter.
It's not apples to apples. I mean, what would a grade 6 sample like this, how would that compare to this?
Yeah, it's not much different. I think actually the one that's in the newspaper here is a grade 6 one. It's the same type of format though.
Well, I understand that, but in terms of evaluating a different approach to knowledge acquisition, it's hard for us, it's hard for me anyway, I don't know about anybody else. It's hard for me to say, well, this is what grade 6 kids are supposed to know, and what this is what grade 8 kids. It's hard to figure out if there's a better way. I'm just having a hard time.
I think that
We
I
don't have a
selected
choice.
those because they were shorter samples, but there are grade 6 samples of the Smarter Balanced one available online as well. And so let me see if I can go to my expanded presentation.
That's, if no one else has a problem with it, then I don't
I mean,
want to
this
bog
is
this down.
just to be, just to illustrate what they would be like. For example, here's one that were matched to the same grade level.
That's
and-
6, that's a grade 6?
Right, this is, I'm not sure this is grade 6, it might be grade 4. Randa ate 3/8 of a pizza, Marvin ate 1/8 of the same pizza, what fraction of the pizza did they eat? That would be the CMT way of phrasing it. The new question, they're stuffed with pizza, Tito ate 1/4 of a cheese, then he ate 3/8 of a pepperoni, then he ate a half of a mushroom. Luis ate 5/8 of a cheese, then the other half of the mushroom. All pizzas are the same size. Tito says he ate more pizza than Luis, because Luis didn't eat any pepperoni. Luis says they ate the same. Who's correct? Okay, so those were two that were matched in the book. Now, do they measure the same things? They both measure what would be considered a grade level knowledge of fractions. Okay, but obviously if you're going to answer the second one, you're probably going to need to make some diagrams. You're going to need to even out the denominators between the different pizzas and the different people and so on. So I mean, in the old way, you can say, okay, well that looks like it's about 4/8, that's half, the answer is D. Okay, but in the second one, we're still testing fractions, but we're testing it in a much more sophisticated and applied way.
The first one you can guess.
That's right.
The second one you gotta have to do
You have to do
a little work
something, yeah.
to see, yeah. So it's the process, it shows you that they know the process.
All of these came from these websites, which are actually posted on my webpage, on the link under the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, because we're trying to make this information widely available to our teachers so that they get the hang of it as well. And so I'd be happy to email the links if you want to test yourself a little bit more, but I think those I picked out because they were shorter ones, and I thought that they served to illustrate the difficulty and the differences in format between the two different tests. Also in this presentation, I think I went into more detail about the purchase specifications and all of the hardware components, operating systems, networking details, and device types that are being considered for the test. So I mean, a lot of thinking is going into this to try to make it work over the next 3-year period. Let's see if I have some more on that.
Can I just ask one more question about the testing?
Sure.
You said that geometry will be in the 8th grade testing?
There's geometry that's embedded in all the grades in CMT already, a geometry strand, but maybe not specifically the type of geometry problems that you remember as a student that you learned in a high school geometry class.
I mean, it's been an issue in the past with students taking the CAP testing with the geometry. They
Right.
hadn't taken geometry yet. Are we looking at if these types of things are going to be on this new testing, if we're preparing the students for this type of questioning?
Like, as I said, even in the CMTs today, there are different strands. There's number sense, there's geometry, there's data, and there's probability and statistics. All of those are currently being tested and are taught at a developmentally appropriate and spiral through the existing curriculum right now. So when you think geometry, geometric concepts, shapes is geometry. At a lower grade level, it would be, can you identify shapes, can you rotate shapes, can you divide and bisect shapes? It's not the kind of geometry that you think of associated with a geometry high school class. So yes, we're addressing that already, and we will continue to address that in our curriculum as we're moving forward.
Because we're also with the new state standards, they have changed the approach and to what point certain content, skills, and strategies are taught, where in the past it's been more spiral through the standards. Now it's like, okay, here it is, here's the first 3 years, you make sure they've got it really well, really strong, understanding, can apply it, and then that's the last time they're going to see it.
Is that to say that, follow the geometry line of thought, is that to say that they're not going to teach it in terms of like diagrams and proofs?
That content is covered in a high school geometry course.
I thought that's, okay.
Right, but we don't teach students proofs, for example, in the 4th or 5th grade, because it's not developmentally
okay.
proven. But still they have geometry concepts, so.
Yeah. That, in high school, that's still going to be.
Yeah,
the way
right,
of
that's
teaching
still
geometry.
intact, right.
So we are piloting this in 2 years, not this year, but the year after.
We can volunteer to be a pilot district, which I would encourage us to do, because the first time you do something, it's no fault. You don't do it badly because it's your baseline. but it gives you information about what you need to do, where you need to go, instructionally, in terms of your technology, in terms of your processes and procedures, in terms of how you manage the students. You know, do you send 6 kids to test at one time or half of your class to test at one time? That will be useful information for us so that by the time 2015 rolls around, we've given ourselves some experience with it. So I think Cheryl would probably agree as well that it would be prudent for us to volunteer to take on some items next year.
Okay, but we haven't done that yet.
No, it's not available yet.
And if we do, we will have to invest in new technology just to be able to pilot it.
I don't think that we will. We can use existing hardware in the district, and we should have more than adequate bandwidth, particularly since, as we mentioned in the presentation, we're not testing all 2,500 students who are in the tested grades simultaneously. We'll probably be testing small batches of students, perhaps in different schools, different classrooms, perhaps different times of the day. So I don't anticipate there being any issues with bottlenecks unless we choose to see what our system can bear.
So we would give some kids the regular CMTs and some kids the pilot version?
Now, everybody would still have to take the CMTs.
Everybody would have to take the CMTs, and this would just be an added feature of it.
No, because we finished with the CMTs.
Well, we have to do
Next
CMTs
March.
one more year.
Right.
But we can do the pilot in 2013 and 2014 because then they don't start until 2015.
Otherwise, we wouldn't test at all?
Well, John's question was in 2013, every student still has to take the CMT.
Correct.
But some students, we could volunteer to give students extra testing to pilot it. Is that right, John?
And would we then be able to take the performance of the same students and compare them on the 2 versions of the test?
Probably not, because they're different test designs. They are measuring potentially different objectives. They're different items. It's apples and oranges to some degree. We've been told statistically, we can't even compare the older generation of CMT with the current generation because of differences in test design. Plus, the items are being piloted, so they haven't been normed yet. So they're trying to get a sense for how well students will do.
But we could know how kids did relative to other kids if we had the information for both versions of the test.
Potentially.
But we may not even get from the pilots, we may not even get,
The state is famous for that, I know what you're
right,
going to say.
yes. Because this year.
Thank you for participating, end of sentence.
Right, right. We had our ELL students participate, taking the new version of the last links online because they too are moving, that's mandated for any child in the ELL program. And they took it online because we said we might as well get them prepared for just the practice, plus have the teachers and the administration, because it changes also the whole approach for administering the test.
There's many other testing opportunities, experiences that our students are involved in, sometimes randomly, like the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP test. PISA is also the, tell me what PISA stands for. It's an international test.
International Scholastic Achievement.
And basically the state will at random pick a variety of districts around the state representing different geographic areas, different sized districts, different demographics, so that they can collect information about student performance for the national report card and also for international comparison.
Torrington's been selected for.
Every year.
Every year.
We do something, yeah. A
It's
different
not
grade
too
level.
random, oh, for something different.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
4th
we're a
grade,
different grade
8th
level,
grade, high
different
school.
It's a state definition of random.
Yeah.
No, that's a federal definition of
Federal
random.
So it's safe to say that the new test scores versus the old test scores.
Are
The
not
CMT
comparable, no.
just tests every kid to a given level, but the new test score is going to say, you're not smarter than the average 5th grader, you have a 7th grade or an 8th grade aptitude, or if you're not as smart as a 5th grader, it'll tell you that you are, say, at a 3rd grade level in a given subject, and that's where you need it.
It may not even be grade normed.
It'll be based on mastery. You know this much, you know this much.
Well, at what point, how
This much
much
of what?
does somebody have to know to go to the next much, or we'll call it bunch of much, which is the next class.
Where are
The
the
norm
I'm
is
serious,
delineations?
I mean,
Where's the delineations
nothing
of
is
much?
normed.
Right.
What's a second
Right.
grade much, what's a third grade much, what's a fourth
Right.
grade?
They won't be able to tell you that until they have a baseline of student performance.
Isn't that normative then? I thought we just said it's not gonna be normed anymore.
Eventually, in order to meet the federal requirements that currently are embedded in No Child Left Behind, they'll have to set a proficiency level so that you know which students are above the proficiency level and which students are below the proficiency level.
And how
But-
long do they?
First several years, it's gonna be useless information.
No, it'll be very useful because it's also formative in nature. It'll give the teachers a lot of information and very quick turnaround as to what their students are doing well and where they need to have additional instruction. So for us, it'll be very useful as a tool for measuring our district's achievement level. I think it's gonna take some time for them to build an adequate database to be able to draw accurate assumptions about the school and district's performance. Remember, the CMTs are not primarily a test of student achievement. They generate data that's being used to determine the effectiveness of the school or the district performance. So this one is actually, in many ways, going to be a lot more useful in terms of giving teachers good information about how their student, what a child knows, what their students know and do.
Because the high school kids don't take it every year, what will happen to the grade that does in that transition year?
I think our current students going into the current freshman class are going to take every test. So they'll take CAPT until CAPT is sunsetted, and then they'll pick up with Smarter Balance. So they'll take whatever test, whatever assessment, whatever test assignments are appropriate for their grade level. And then there will be some students, our current kindergartners, for example, will never experience the CMTs. They'll never have any data related to the CMT domains or the CMT.
So
tests.
9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th will take these
The
new
high
tests?
school, they're only required to test grade 11.
Right.
Currently it's grade 10.
So the kids that don't get the CAP test in grade 10 in 2014,
Get a
because
break.
their grandfather will take the Smarter Balance.
When they're in grade
Right.
11.
So they'll still get tested just a year later.
Okay.
It's fascinating. It's very different.
Well, okay, I understand the enthusiasm, but, you know, again, after 10 years of this stuff, going back to when, you know, No Child Left Behind was rolling in, and the enthusiasm there too was, you know, this is the newest, greatest, and this has lots of nice bells and whistles, so I apologize ahead of time if I am just once again being cynical about it, but let me ask a practical question. With this rolling testing, right? Essentially, you're going to be rolling out kids on a regular basis, portions of kids to take the test, right? Every class. That's what
We
you're
don't know
gonna
that yet,
do. Well, I thought that's what you
Yeah,
said. The
over
process.
3 months.
Over a 12-week window.
but you don't know how you're gonna split
Right.
the classes.
But over a 12-week window, you'll be taking portions of a classroom to be tested.
We may elect to do, this is the week, we're gonna test all third grade students, all
Oh,
third grade
okay.
students are tested, or, you know, depending upon
Okay,
the
I thought I
availability
heard
of the number of
within a third
devices.
grade class, you're going to teach.
We don't know what our
higher performing
IT
kids.
capacity's gonna be by that point, as to
Yeah,
how
it
many we
wasn't
can roll out. That's-
Yeah, I
that's-
wasn't going technically.
Well, I'm saying, that's how,
Yeah.
it's gonna really boil down to the seats you have available to give the test in.
Yeah, no, I was more worried about this process, because what I thought I was hearing was that you were gonna try to, for all intents and purposes, you know, test high achieving students at one point, and then, you know, your average students and then your low achieving, no,
No.
within a classroom.
No.
No, it'll be a classroom, we'll go off and get tested in its entirety.
If we
Maybe.
can accommodate a classroom, we
Maybe.
may choose to do it that way. Yeah.
But we may not have the capacity to do an entire class. But by class, I don't mean I mean
A room.
a room.
A room might get split up if we only have the capacity to do half of a room at a
Okay,
time.
if that's the case, that's my point. This is the point I'm stumbling toward here. If that is the reality, and you're doing this over a 12-week period, half, what is a teacher teaching to the half that's not being tested? I mean, isn't that a huge loss of instructional time? While half your class is taking the test, the other half has got to be
Well, could
macrame or
conceivably
something.
doing another part of the test.
No, we don't have
No,
the
'cause we don't have-
capacity. Do you understand
Yes.
my dilemma here?
And if I were the teacher in that situation and I knew that I could only test 10 of my students at a
Yeah.
time, then I would plan an activity that when these 10 are testing, then these 10 are going to be working in guided reading groups with me giving my attention to 10 students instead of trying to manage my full class of 20 students. And then we'll flip-flop. These students will be tested and those students will have an opportunity to do a guided reading activity or a math project or a social studies activity.
And this really seems to you to be a realistic, practical approach to getting 25 kids moving forward.
In knowing,
time?
well,
Learning, not testing, I'm talking about learning, knowledge acquisition.
in knowing what the current practice is in many elementary classrooms where centers are widely used for math and for language arts and where there are lots of project-based activities in place, I think it's something that teachers are comfortable with and it's a realistic model.
Yeah, but that model has failed. And one of the reasons we're talking about reinventing education is because of a generation of failure within public schools. So maybe that's part of the problem.
Not every school has had the equal resources that all other schools have had.
But we're going to be lacking resources in this new world.
But that's part of the technology committee that we put together to look at our buildings, to
Yeah.
assess where we're at, because we know that we have certain buildings that are older that don't have the capacity of the newer buildings. We know that. We have to go through capital right now
I
and
get
beat
that,
on the
yeah.
city, because we have 2 years, like was discussed last night. We have a goal now, 2 years from now.
Yeah.
We have to have these kids ready to take these tests. We have 2 years to decide as an administration and a board how we want these kids to take that test. Do we want classrooms split up? Do we not want classrooms split up? Then we have to look at the building and say, now we've selected that we want to test, and I'm just going to pick, Sue, and I don't mean to, we're going to pick a grade level. And we're going to say second grade is going, or third grade is going to test this week.
Yeah.
We have to make sure then that we have the capacity in each building, each elementary school, that the second or third grade can test this week
At the same time.
at the same time. But that's a decision that, unfortunately, right now, your questions are good questions, but the cart's so far in front of the horse right now, because we really don't even know the test yet, and the capacity requirements
I'm trying to put the
get us
horse
to
in
that
front of the
point.
cart. And the horse, to me, is the emphasis as
But
we
they
move
haven't
forward.
given us the stuff yet.
Oh, okay, no, all I'm saying is we
I
just,
agree
at this
with
board, and we cannot lose sight of the fact that the primary goal of what we all do here is education, not testing, is learning, not testing. I mean, and we shouldn't be compromising the teaching part for the sake of a more efficient testing part. That's just backwards.
And I think Sue tried to explain, in a general elementary classroom, 3 through 5, there's seldom the teacher standing up in front of the class.
Dispensing information.
Yes, okay. Students are working in small groups. The teacher's working with a small guided group. What can happen within that room is not half, not all of them, maybe 5 today are doing it. But that whole process of going onto computers and doing something on the computer related to something else in the classroom that they're working on, whether it's science, whether it's reading, that has to become embedded as part of the regular instruction of the classroom, so that this is not a new experience. Oh, we're doing our testing for the next 3 months. This is new. Okay, you 3 are gonna go and you're gonna work this morning over here on the computers. That's all a teacher should have to stay, and up it comes, and he makes sure that it's running what they're gonna be tested on today, and the rest of the classroom goes about the regular process and protocol of instruction in the room.
But that's a discussion that we have to have, because at another time when we have all that information, because as we've stated before, myself included, I know Dave Oliver spoke up on it, there's absolutely no way you could sit me in the corner of a classroom and expect me to pay attention to a computer screen when everybody else in the classroom is doing something else, because I'm going to look at everybody else in the classroom. I just am. And there's an awful lot of students that are going to do the same
You
thing.
will make the accommodations.
Well,
You may
I
be
don't know
sick.
I don't know if I'm going to pass the 6th grade test. We'll
But-
see. I'm going to take it.
But you
know,
will
it's-
go out, if that needs be, then
I
you will leave the
understand,
room.
but this, right now, you know, taking the information that you guys have given us, we have now 2 years to set up how we want it, or we have 1 year to set up how we want to do it, how we're gonna fund it. So we have 1 year to implement, 1 year. 2 years. We only have 1 year to decide how we want to go forward, how we're gonna fund it, what we need to do at each building to make the way that we agree the testing should be done, so that it's not disruptive to the overall process, and the kids get a fair chance, because I think you will find that, and this is just my assumption, but you're gonna find better than 50% of the kids are gonna get distracted if they're sitting in the same classroom and other kids are doing something else.
And not all kids are gonna bring the same level of proficiency in terms of their keyboarding skills. I think some of the testing, as the students are advancing through the grades, assume that students have the capacity to type, to word process 20 words per minute. Okay, and I'm gonna bet our third graders can't word process 20 words a minute.
If they can use their thumbs, they can.
Maybe they can't. But you see, this is,
Keyboard, they're in trouble.
we're starting to get more specific information as this process is evolving. And, you know, for example, Tony Alpert shared these new purchase specifications saying if your district is buying new equipment, make sure that it at least meets these requirements. Make sure that you at least have these operating systems installed. Make sure, you know, that you still understand that you have some flexibility in the kinds of devices that you want to buy. And actually, part of the curriculum work that was being done this summer as part of the library, media, and information literacy curriculum was addressing how do we back into the skills that students are going to need as first graders, second graders, third graders, so that when they're third graders, it's not the first time they're putting their hands on a keyboard. So that's why this process is unfolding over time, and we're trying to keep people informed about how it's different, why it's different, and still working out some of the logistics as we go on.
When would you hope to have, to be able to nail down the technology requirements that we're gonna need? I mean, do you think we can have that fairly well nailed down by October, November?
Yeah, definitely well before the budget season, and the reason I'm saying that is that we were required to submit our district's version of the technology readiness tool by June 20th, I think it was. So it was right after school ended. And all of that information is being compiled in a database so that the developers of this test can say, wow, wait a minute, most districts can only do this level in terms of what they can support with technology, can support with training, can support with capacity. Maybe we need to reconsider this timeline. Or maybe we need to work with states so that state boards of education can reallocate funding to support those districts that are further behind others. So they're collecting this information. The Connecticut Assessment Forum is sort of the premier place where information like this is shared, and that's scheduled to take place in August. So I would be able to report back after that meeting regarding any changes or any new information that would help us to key in well in advance of any budget process.
I'm just concerned about relying strictly on them to get us that data without us assessing that data ourselves for what we think we're gonna need, because
they're pretty good
state tends to run late.
Yeah, they're pretty good about pushing it out because it's not run by the state of Connecticut, it's run by the assessment consortium. So Cheryl and I and probably some of the principals belong to the listservs, and we get regular updates from the company. We're releasing new sample items, we're releasing the technology specifications, whatever. So they're not keeping it under their hats. As soon as they have something to share, it's being bumped out.
All right, well, thank you for that. Oh. All right, one more.
At a future meeting, since we're addressing this, we had seen the report about what each building had as far as computers and accessibility. I would like us to look deeper into that piece of it, because the technology down the road is great, but it doesn't do these kids any good if they're starting to have access to computers the year they're taking the test. We know we have a serious inequity in the district.
Right. That's why I said we have 2 years. We really have to plan this year so that we're implementing next year, so they have a whole year to be acclimated before we get to a testing cycle.
Right.
I agree on that.
I was
So-
gonna say, if I had a network connection, and I don't think I'm hooked up for that, I could show you the work that was done this summer by the Library Media Group and how they backed
Another
into
meeting.
the skills and experiences.
At another meeting.
They've already been working on that this summer,
Yeah, I mean, at a future
Yeah.
meeting, I'd
Right.
actually like to see
Yeah.
how much computer time is a kid at Vogel Wetmore School getting versus how much computer time is a child at Torringford getting, or interacting to just see.
Chairman, we can also bring you updated with purchases made during the summer.
Right, and at a
Equipment.
future meeting, just, let's look at the whole thing, not just the educational piece plus the readiness piece.